Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about the classic book, Prince Caspian, written by C.S. Lewis. This is the second book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. I did a review not too long ago on the first book in the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Been reading through it with my girls. We actually finished this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm just now getting around to finishing a review for it. So we are well on our way into book 3, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which my girls are enjoying, and I'm enjoying revisiting as well. So wanted to just put together a quick review video sharing my thoughts on this wonderful book. This is a contemporary classic written in the 50s by medieval scholar and turned fiction writer and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis. It's part of his classic series in the Chronicles of Narnia, this fantasy genre. And this is a great book which tells the story of what happens to the four Pevensey children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, about a year after they had gone to Narnia and then made their way back home. A year has passed in their time, and they find themselves then pulled by magic back into the world of Narnia. Except the world they're pulled into is not the Narnia that they left behind. It's thousands of years later. The castle they had lived in has fallen into decay. The kingship they had left has fallen into disrepair, and foreign invaders have come into the land. And so part of their work is to restore old Narnia, true Narnia, and to restore a king to the throne, helping Aslan do that, or working with Aslan in doing that. And so it's a really interesting plot and story. It follows the title character, Prince Caspian, who is not a Narnian by blood. He is a Telmarine, which we find out at the end of the book. Spoiler alert, right? At the end of the book, we find out that these are people who made their way from our world to Narnia, populated a great country, and then invaded Narnia at some point. But Caspian, even though he's not Narnian by blood, is Narnian by love, and loves the old Narnian ways and stories, and works to restore that. And so that's the kind of plot of the book. Is it's putting Caspian on the throne, overthrowing the pretender, his evil uncle Miraz, and along the way there are just some really wonderful scenes and characters that are introduced. One of the most famous characters that gets introduced in this book is Reepicheep, who will feature very prominently in book 3, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and then again appear in the last battle, and just one of those wonderful heroes of Narnia that we grew up loving. So I really enjoyed reading this with my girls. They really loved the story. They would run around the house playing Narnia all the time after we finished it. One thing I noticed reading through it this time, and this is maybe especially because my girls are a little younger, one is 6, one is 4, one is 2. The 2-year-old wasn't paying very much attention, but the 4-year-old and the 6-year-old were. But one of the things that's a little different about this story is a lot of the story is actually told kind of in flashback, because the Pevensey children end up meeting a dwarf named Trumpkin, who then tells them, here's what's been going on in Narnia. And so you're hearing Trumpkin tell about things that happened in the past. So there was a little bit of confusion with the younger listeners, just trying to piece together, where are we, or who's saying this, that kind of thing. But they were able to follow it and enjoy it. So just something to be aware of if you've got a younger reader tackling this. They may need a little help with the chronology. But overall, again, reads very well and is a wonderfully told story. There's just 2 scenes or lines that I wanted to kind of highlight from the book that I particularly enjoy. Again, it's such a wonderful book. There's so many things. But one of the things that happens in the book, those of you who've read it will know, is that Peter, Edmund, Susan, and Lucy are called into Narnia by Caspian. They need his help, or he needs their help, but they appear at the old castle of Cair Paravel, and they have to make their way to where Caspian and the Narnian army is kind of under siege by Miraz's army. And so a big part of the book is their journey there. And one of the things that kind of comes out is early on, Lucy sees Aslan and sees that he wants them to go a certain way, but no one else saw Aslan, and no one's really believing her or acting on what she's saying. And so they end up going their own way, a way that makes sense to them, right? Which is, of course, something that should resonate with any Christian, that this theme. And so Lucy has to deal with this, trying to convince her companions, her brothers and sisters, and Trumpkin the dwarf to follow what she saw Aslan saying they should do. But they don't really, come to see that until later on. And so there are a few conversations that Lucy has with Aslan before the others recognize who, that she's actually seeing something true. And there's this wonderful encounter where she's not just seeing a vision of Aslan, but she actually sees him and she gets to talk to him. And as she gazed up into the large, wise face, we read, and he said, "Welcome, child." And Lucy says, "Aslan, you're bigger." And Aslan says, "That's because you're older, little one. Not because you are? I am not. But every year you grow, you will find me bigger." And for a time, she was so happy that she did not want to speak. And I just love that exchange because it captures, of course, Aslan is this picture of Christ. Lewis is very, transparent about that. And it just captures that experience of growing in Christ and growing in our faith, that God seems to get bigger. And it's not actually because he's getting bigger, it's because we're growing. We're growing in our knowledge, we're growing in our understanding. I just preached recently on Ephesians 3, and Paul has this prayer that the Ephesians would be strengthened and rooted and grounded in the love of God and the love of Christ, and that they would grow in that, in a knowledge that surpasses knowledge, being filled with all the fullness of God. And that's the kind of language that I think Lewis is drawing on here to describe our experience of the Christian life, that as we grow, we are filled with the fullness of God, and we grow and expand with that. There's this knowledge that surpasses knowledge. There's this love that we can never fully comprehend, but that we endlessly pursue. And it's, to borrow a phrase that he'll use in the last battle, it's, further up and higher up and further in is the experience of the Christian life. So I love that line and that scene. And there's another one at the end where Caspian is has won and has become king, and Aslan is telling him where his people actually came from, and he's telling them that they actually are from Earth. They're from our world. They're descendants of Adam and Eve who made their way into Narnia. But the first people who came over were pirates who came. They had robbed and fled from the world they'd been created in to come into another world and to wreak havoc there. And Caspian says, "I wish that I came of a more honorable lineage." And here's Aslan's reply. He says, "You come of the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve, and that is both honor enough to erect the head of the poorest beggar and shame enough to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor on earth. Be content." And then it says, "Caspian bowed." And I think that statement captures a Christian view of man. That it's not the kind of naive, positive, humanity is always great, we're all basically good. No, it recognizes there's something in being of Adam and Eve that should bow our heads, that should humble us, that brings shame. And yet there's also the fact that we're made in the image of God. We're not just materialists. We don't believe that man is just another animal, another creature that has somehow clawed its way to the top. But we're made in the image of God himself. And so being of that lineage, sharing in that image, is enough to have honor to erect the head of the Lord of the poorest beggar, and also shame enough to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor in earth. So again, just a wonderful line there about a Christian view of humanity in that exchange that Caspian and Aslan had. One thought that I had, I'm curious, those of you who have thought more about Narnia than I have, if you've ever seen any connections here, but reading through this again, one of the things that stands out about Narnia in contrast to, say, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is that Lewis is not afraid to, use analogy and allegory in his stories to portray things from the biblical story. And of course, you get that very famously in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Aslan is this Christ figure. There are, the women who come and attend to him at his death and at, before and afterwards, right? In the form of Lucy and Susan, which in the Gospels, it's the women who accompany Christ and meet him at the tomb. And there's all these, wonderful overlaps and echoes. With Caspian, I hadn't really noticed, a lot of explicit connections like that. There's obviously, as I pointed out with both of those scenes, there's Christian theology and ideas being communicated and pictured in a beautiful and powerful way. But I did wonder if there's sort of an echo here of Christ coming as the king, and in the form of Caspian, perhaps. I'm not sure. So here's what I'm thinking. I'll just throw my idea out there. But with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's almost like there's this redemption that's taken place in the past. It's almost like the Exodus or something. And then with Caspian, you have something taking place with the same people, but years and years later, there are foreign invaders who've come in. You have the kind of native old Narnians, but also these Telmarines who are being brought in as well, almost like the Jews and the Gentiles. And part of what happens with Caspian is the kind of reinstating of the right king and the welcoming in, the incorporating of the Gentiles with the Jews, the Telmarines with the Narnians. And kind of the dividing line at the end of the book is, are you going to believe in this good king or not? And some of the old Narnians don't. They reject him, and some of the Telmarines do accept him. So you get that kind of interesting connections with what you have in the life of Christ. Obviously, that analogy doesn't work perfectly because Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is picturing Christ's work. This is happening afterwards. So I think it's better to see it not so much as a strict chronology. I'm not saying that, one is picturing one part of redemption, one is picturing the other. But I'm wondering if Lewis is drawing on some of those biblical themes and struggles and dynamics that happen and in Prince Caspian. But don't know. That's just a thought that came to me. I hadn't thought about that before. But that's the wonderful thing about Lewis and about classic literature in general, is you can return to it again and again. You'll hear echoes, you'll see connections, you'll see how this story is a reflection of and a picture of other great stories and of the greatest story that we have in the scriptures. So for all of those reasons, I would strongly encourage everyone to read or reread Book 2 of the Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis.